things came back from Witz's flat. When he unpacked them, he saw one book was missing. The first volume of Taylor's Medical Jurisprudence. Donald wetted his lips and nodded. That upset Donald awfully, because after they read the papers this morning, Donald and Witz had an argument about how long it took to asphyxiate anybody? Asked Alain. Yes, and Donald looked it up in his book. Did Captain Withers handle the book? Donald said, Yes, he did. He read a bit of it and then lost interest. He thought it would have taken longer, he said. Donald was puzzled about the book not arriving and about Witz telling him not to come to the flat, so he rang up. When Witz heard Donald's voice, he simply cut him off without another word, didn't he, darling? Yes, said Donald. I rang again and he didn't answer. Well, Donald got so rattled that he felt he had to see him. Now you go on, Donald. With unsteady fingers, Donald lit a fresh cigarette. When I walked into the sitting room, he was lying on the divan bed. I said I wanted to know why he'd behaved as he did. I said something about you, sir, and in a split second he was on his feet. I thought he was going to start a fight. He asked me what the bloody hell I'd said to you about him. I said I'd avoided speaking about him as much as possible, but he began to ask all sorts of questions. God, he did look ugly. He said that unless I kept my head and held my tongue, he'd begin to talk himself. He said that after all I had quarrelled with Uncle Bunch, and I had been in debt, and I was Uncle Bunch's heir. He said if he was in this thing up to his knees, I was in it up to my neck. He pointed his flat finger at my neck. Then he told me to remember, if I didn't want to commit suicide, that when he left Marston House, he went to his car and drove to the Matador. I was to say that I'd seen him drive off with his partner. Did you see this? No, I left after him. He stopped and took a deep breath. After seeing Witz this evening, I believe he murdered my uncle. Proof? I've none. Only the way he spoke tonight. It seemed enough to bring me here when I might have kept quiet. The telephone rang. Alain answered it. Roderick, is that you? It's Evelyn Carados. Roderick, I'm so worried. Bridgie has gone out without saying a word to anyone. I'm so terrified she's done something wild and foolish. Thank heaven Herbert's out at a regimental dinner at Tunbridge. It's all right, Evelyn, said Alain. Bridget's here with me. She wanted to talk to me. She's quite all right. I'll bring her back. Is Donald Potter there? Yes. But why? Roderick, I want to see you. I'll come and get Bridget, may I? Yes, do, said Alain and gave her his address. He hung up the receiver and turned to find Bridget and Donald looking very startled. Donna, whispered Bridget. Oh, golly. Your mother won't be here for 10 minutes, said Alain. Look here, Donald, I want a full account of this gambling business. If I put you in another room, will you write one for me? It will, I hope, lead to Captain Withers' conviction. I'll do it. Alain took him into the dining room and settled him there with pen and paper and returned to find Bridget looking very frightened. Does Bart know? No, but your mother's been very worried. Well, that's not all me. You may not have realized what a temper Bart's got. I didn't until I was about 15. Donna had been ill, and she was sleeping very badly. I said we must have Sir Daniel. I went downstairs into Bart's study because I told the butler to show Sir Daniel in there, and then Sir Dan came in and I told him about Donna. Did you notice in the study there's a French escritoire thing on a table? Yes. Well, Sir Dan adores old things, and he raved about it and said it was a beautiful piece, and told me when it was made and how they used sometimes to put little secret drawers in them, and you just touch a screw and they fly out. So when Sir Dan had gone up to Donna, I tried prodding the screws with a pencil, and a little drawer did fly out triangularly. Sort of. There was a letter in it. I didn't touch it, but while I was looking at the drawer, Bart came in. He went absolutely stark ravers, took hold of my arm and twisted it so much I screamed, and then he called me a little bastard. I believed he'd have hit me if Sir Dan hadn't come down. Sir Dan had one glance at my arm. I had short sleeves, and then he said in a lovely, dangerous sort of voice, "Are you producing another patient for me, Carados?" Bart banged the little drawer shut and tried to pretend I'd slipped on the polished floor and he'd caught me by the arm. When Sir Dan had gone, Bart apologised to me and said he was really terribly nervy and had never recovered from the war, which was pretty good as he spent it in Tunbridge Wells. He said there was a letter from his mother in the drawer and it was very sacred. He's never forgiven me and I've never forgotten. My private belief is there was something about his miserable past in that drawer. It's a queer story, isn't it? She said. Very queer indeed, said Alain. Have you ever told anyone else about it? No, only Donald. Tell me, said Alain. Do you think anyone else knows the secret of that French writing case? I shouldn't think so. Has Sir Daniel ever been alone in that room?
I don't think he's been in the study before or since, and he was never alone there that day.
Has Dmitri the catering man ever been alone in that room?
He interviewed Donna there about a month before our ball dance. I went down first, and he was alone in the room.
Can you remember the date?
It was on the 10th of May. We were going to Newmarket, and Dmitri came early in the morning because of that.
See here, said Alain. I want you to forget about all of this. Don't speak of it to anyone, not even to Donald. I want you to promise.
All right, I promise.
The front doorbell rang. Here's your mother, said Alain. When Evelyn Carados walked into the sitting room, Alain was not prepared for her haunted eyes and the drawn nervousness of her mouth. Come and sit down, Evelyn, he said. There's nothing to worry about. I would have brought your daughter home, but she had some interesting news, and I thought you would trust her with me for half an hour.
Yes, Roderick, of course. Where's Donald? I thought he was here.
He's in the next room. Shall we send Bridget to join him for a minute or two?
Please.
Don't interrupt him, said Alain as Bridget went out.
All right.
The door closed behind her. Now then, Alain said, there's no need for you to fuss about Bridget. She's been, on the whole, a very sensible young person, and her only fault is in giving a commonplace visit the air of a secret elopement. Was that all that worried you?
No. It's Herbert. He stayed indoors all day, and he never takes his eyes off me. I asked my secretary, Miss Harris, to join us at tea, because I thought if she was there it might be a little easier. Most unfortunately, poor Miss Harris began to speak to Bridget about Bunchy. She said she'd been reading a book on famous trials, and somehow or other the word blackmail cropped up. I looked up to find Herbert's eyes fixed on me with an expression of knowing terror. He didn't go with the others after tea, but hung about the room watching me. Suddenly, he said, "You were very friendly with Robert Gospel, weren't you?" Then he asked me to show him my bank book. I put him off by saying I couldn't find the book. Suddenly, he asked me if Bunchy had ever called when I was out. He sat glaring at me, and then he said, did he know anything about old furniture?
Alain glanced up quickly. Old furniture?
It sounds demented, doesn't it? Then Herbert said, antiques, pieces like the escritoire in my study. I said, Herbert, what are you talking about? And he said, I suppose I'm going to pieces. I feel I have been surrounded by treachery all my life. I asked him how he could talk like that. I began to say that Bridget was always loyal when he burst out laughing. Your daughter, he said, loyal? How far do you suppose her loyalty would take her? Would you care to put it to the test?
When did you marry him, Evelyn?
When? 2 years after Paddy died. He had wanted me to marry him before. He'd always been rather attached to me. I suppose you wonder why I married him, don't you?
Perhaps you felt that you needed security.
It was exactly that. But it wasn't fair. He's a mass of repressions, and queer, twisted thoughts. Do you know, I think he is still intensely jealous of Paddy's memory.
Did you see much of him before Paddy died?
Yes. I'm afraid, poor Herbert, that he rather saw himself as the faithful, chivalrous friend who continued to adore me quite honourably after I was married. In a way, he was our greatest friend. Why, in a way, I owe it to Herbert that I was in time to see Paddy before he died.
How did that come about?
It was Herbert who drove me down to the vicarage at Falconbridge on the day Paddy died.
The inquest on Lord Robert Gospel was held at 11 o'clock the next morning. The coroner was a cross-grained man with the poorest possible opinion of society with a small s and a perfectly venomous hatred of society with a large one. He addressed the jury in words that left them in no possible doubt as to the verdict they should return, and when they had duly returned it, ordered an adjournment. The whole proceedings had lasted 20 minutes. "Swish," said Fox when he met Alain in the street outside. "That's old slap-bang, here we are again. Can't beat him for speed, can you, sir?" "Mercifully you can't. Fox, we're off to Barbican-Bramley. I borrowed my mother's car, and I've a hell of a lot to tell you, and I rather think the spell is wound up." "Sir?" "You're quite right, Fox. Never quote, and if you do, certainly not from Macbeth." Lady Alain's car was parked in a side street. Fox and Alain got into it and headed for the Uxbridge Road. On the way, Alain related Bridget's and Donald's and Lady Carados's stories. When he had finished, Fox grunted, and they were both silent for 10 minutes. Do you think the cloak and hat may still be hidden away in the guilty party's house, sir? No, I think he got rid of them yesterday before we had covered the first phase of investigation. By post? Where would he send them? Ruminated Fox. Put yourself in his place. What address would you put on an incriminating parcel? Care of Private Who Flung Dung, 42nd Battalion, Chop Suey, Mahjong, Manchuria, to wait till called for, suggested Fox irritably. Something very like that, Brer Fox. They found the Reverend Mr. Walter Harris's house without any difficulty. The grounds in which it stood were 1/8 of an acre of charming cottage garden, and the Reverend and Mrs. Walter Harris were very old indeed. Upon Mrs. Harris's hair, rather than her head, was a wide garden hat. Her husband wore an ancient Panama with a faded green ribbon. Alain said, "I'm so sorry to bother you. We are police officers investigating a case and are anxious to trace a letter which we believe to have been lost in Falconbridge between 17 and 18 years ago. There was a motor accident on the bridge. The driver, Captain O'Brien, was severely injured and was taken into the rectory." "Dear me, yes." "Can you remember anything about a letter that was lost on the occasion of Captain O'Brien's accident?" "To be sure I do," said Mrs. Harris. "I sent it after him. It was after they had taken him away that we found it under the couch in the study." "Why," I said, "why, it must have dropped out of that poor fellow's coat. And I said to little Violet, 'Pop on your bicycle and take it to the hospital as quickly as you can, dear, because they may be looking for it.' So little Violet—" "Who was little Violet?" "Our niece. She was spending her holidays with us. She's grown up now and has a delightful post in London with the Lady Carados." "Thank you," said Alain. "Please go on." But there was not much more to tell. Apparently Violet Harris had bicycled off with Paddy O'Brien's letter, and had returned to say she had given it to the gentleman who had brought the lady in the motor car. The gentleman had been sitting in the motor car outside the hospital. "Well," ejaculated Fox. "Well," as Alain drove away down Oak Apple Lane. "Before this evening, Fox, I want to make certainties of our suspicions. And when we get back, we'll have to arrange for these people to come round to the yard. We'll want Miss Harris, Bridget O'Brien, her mother, Carados himself, Davidson, Withers, Dimitri, and Mrs. Halkett Hackett." "When shall we get them to come, sir?" "It'll be 4 o'clock by the time we're back to the yard. I think we'll make it 9 o'clock. It's going to be devilish tricky." At the yard they found reports from the officers who were out on the job. Dimitri's men reported that Francois had gone to the local stationer's and bought a copy of this morning's Times. The stationer had told the yardman that Dimitri, as a rule, took the Daily Express. "Beat up a Times, Brer Fox." Alain brought his file up to date, and then he rang up Lady Carados. Fox returned with the Times, which he laid on Alain's desk. He pointed a stubby finger at the personal column. "What about the third from the top?" he said. Alain read it aloud. "Childie darling, living in exile, longing, only want daughter, Daddy." "We better ask Father Times about Daddy." "I'll do that," said Fox, "and I'll get going on these people for tonight." "Thank you, Fox. I must report to the AC. Ask them to show Lady Carados up here and ring through when she arrives." On his return to his own room, he found Fox was waiting for him. "Lady Carados is downstairs, sir." "Go and bring her up, Fox, will you?" Fox turned in the doorway. "I've got onto the Times," he said. "The Childie darling thing came by mail with a postal order for double rates and a request that it should appear very particular in this morning's edition. The note said the advertiser would call to collect the change, if any, and was signed W.A.K. Smith. Address GPO, Erith." "Postmark?" "They lost the envelope, but he'll look for it. The writing," said Fox, "was in script on common notepaper. There's one other thing. A clerk at the main Western District reported that during the rush hour yesterday someone left a parcel on the counter. It was soft, about the right weight, and had 5 bob in twopenny stamps on it. He remembers the address was to somewhere in China, and it was written in script. So, my Private Who Flung Dung may have been a fair guess. We've got on to Mount Pleasant, and it's too late. A parcels post went out to China this afternoon." "Blah!"
last, said Alain. I'll be off, said Fox, and get her ladyship. While he waited for Lady Carados, Alain cut the little notice out of the Times, and taking out Mrs. Halkett Hackett's gold cigarette case, opened it, and neatly gummed the notice inside the lid. Fox showed Lady Carados in and went away. Evelyn, I want you to give me permission to talk to your husband in front of you about Paddy O'Brien. You mean, tell him that we were not married? I should not do it if it wasn't vitally necessary. I do not believe, Evelyn, that he would— Alain hesitated. That he would be as shocked as you imagine. It will certainly help us to see justice done on your blackmailer. She looked at him. Quite deliberately, he used the whole force of that thing people call personality. She raised her hands and let them fall limply back on her lap. Very well. I'll do whatever you think best, Roderick. The merciless scent of flowers was so heavy that it hung like mist on the cold air. The room was crowded with flowers. In the centre, on 3 shrouded trestles, Robert Gospel's body lay in its coffin. It was the face of an elderly baby dignified by the possession of some terrific secret. Alain was not troubled by the face. All dead faces looked like that. But the small fat hands which in life had moved with staccato emphasis were obediently folded, and when he saw these, his eyes were blinded by tears. After a minute he went out into the hall. In the doorway he met Troy. He heard his own voice saying, "Hello. You're going to save my life. It's nearly 5. Had 6 hours sleep in the last 58 hours. That's nothing for us hardy coppers, but for some reason I'm feeling sorry for myself. Would you take tea or a drink, or possibly both of me? For God's sake, say that you will." "Very well. Where shall we go?" "My flat, unless you object to my flat." "I'm not a debutante," said Troy. "I don't think I need coddle my reputation." "Your flat let it be." On the way, Alain was so filled with astonishment at finding himself agreeably alone with Troy that he fell into a trance from which he only awoke when he pulled the car up outside his own flat. When they were indoors, he was delighted to hear her say, "This is peaceful," and to see her pull off her cap and sit on a low stool before the fireplace. "Shall we have a fire?" asked Alain. "Do say yes, it's not a warm day, really." "Yes, let's," agreed Troy. "Will you light it while I see about tea?" He went out of the room to give Vasily a series of rather confused orders, and when he returned, there was Troy, before the fire, bare-headed, strangely familiar. "It's a nice room, this." He put a box of cigarettes on the floor beside her and took out his pipe. Troy turned and saw her own picture of Suva at the far end of the room. "Oh, yes," said Alain. "There's that." "How did you get hold of it?" "I got someone to buy it for me. Do you remember how I found you that day painting and cursing? It was just as the ship moved out of Suva. Those sulky hills and that ominous sky were behind you." "We had a row, didn't we?" "We did. In fact," said Alain, "there is scarcely an occasion on which we have met when we have not had a row. Why is that, do you suppose?" "I've always been on the defensive." "Have you? For a long time I thought you merely disliked me." "No. You got under my guard." "If it hadn't been for that damned case, things might have gone better," said Alain. "You don't happen to love me. Why the devil should you?" "You don't happen to understand," said Troy shortly. "And why the devil should you? I tell you what, I've always been frightened of the whole business. Love and so on." "The physical side?" "Much more than that, the whole business. The breaking down of all one's reserves." Troy looked at him with a shy determination that made his heart turn over. Vasily came in with tea. He had, Alain saw at a glance, excitedly rushed out to his favourite delicatessen shop round the corner and purchased caviar. His face was wreathed in smiles of embarrassing significance. "Caviar?" said Troy. "Oh, how glad I am! A heavenly tea!" Vasily broke into a loud laugh, excused and bowed himself out. "You've transported the old fool," said Alain. "What is he?" "A Russian carryover from a former case of mine." When they had finished, Troy said, "I must go." "Not yet. I shall commit a heinous impropriety and tell you I may make an arrest this evening." "You know who killed Bunchy?"
We believe we do. If tonight's show goes the right way, we shall be in a position to make the arrest. He looked into her face. Ah, he said. My job again. Why does it revolt you so much? Troy said, It's nothing reasonable. It's simply that I've got an absolute horror of capital punishment. With a nervous movement she touched his head. It's not you. Yet I mind so much that it is you. Alain pulled her hand down against his lips. Everything he had ever felt, every frisson, had been but preparation for this moment when her hand melted against his lips. Presently he found himself leaning over her. He still held her hand like a talisman. He took her face between his hands and kissed her hard on the mouth. He felt her come to life beneath his lips. Then he let her go. "And don't think I shall ask you to forgive me," he said. "You've no right to let this go by. You're too damn particular by half, my girl. I'm your man and you know it." They stared at each other. "That's the stuff to give the troops," Alain added. "The arrogant male." "The arrogant turkey cock," Troy said shakily. "Let me go away now. I want to think. I promise you I did not believe I loved you. It seemed to me that I couldn't love you when I resented so much that you made some sort of demand whenever we met. I'm just plain frightened, and that's a fact." "You shall go. I'll get a taxi." He ran out and got a taxi. When he returned, she was standing in front of the fire looking rather small and lost. "I've been very weak," said Troy. "When I said I'd come, I thought I would keep it all very peaceful and impersonal. You look so worn and troubled, and it was so easy just to do this. And now see what's happened. The skies have opened and the stars have fallen. I feel as if I'd run the world in the last hour. And now you must leave me." Alain glanced at the two chairs under the central lamp, and then at the assistant commissioner sitting motionless in the green-shaded light from his desk. Alain himself stood before the mantelpiece. "Stage set," said the quiet voice beyond the green lamp. "And now the curtain rises." There was a brief silence, and then the door opened. "Sir Herbert and Lady Carados, sir." Alain moved forward, greeted them formally, and then introduced them to the assistant commissioner. Carados's manner was a remarkable mixture of the condescension of a viceroy and the fortitude of an early Christian martyr. They sat, the two heads turned in unison to Alain. Alain said, "Most of what I have to say is addressed to you, Sir Herbert. We have reason to believe that the murder of Lord Robert Gospel is the outcome of blackmail. The connection between this crime and blackmail leads us to one of two conclusions. Either Lord Robert was a blackmailer and was killed by one of his victims, or possibly someone wishing to protect his victim." "What makes you say that?" asked Carados hoarsely. "Just a minute, sir, if you don't mind. I want you now to go back with me to a day nearly 18 years ago when you motored Lady Carados to a village called Falconbridge in Buckinghamshire. It was the day on which Captain Paddy O'Brien met with his accident." Alain saw the sweat around Carados's eyes shine in the lamplight. "You remember that Captain O'Brien was taken first to the vicarage and from there in an ambulance to the hospital where he died a few hours later?" "Yes." "You remember that, after he died, your wife, as she is now, was very distressed because she believed that a certain letter which Captain O'Brien carried had been lost?" "I have no recollection of this." "Lady Carados, did you ask Sir Herbert if he had inquired everywhere for this missing letter?" "Yes." "I think I remember something." "Did you succeed in finding the letter?" "I don't think so." "Do you remember sitting in your car outside the hospital while Lady Carados was with Captain O'Brien?" Carados did not speak. "Lady Carados," said Alain, "did you leave Sir Herbert in the car when you went into the hospital?" "Yes." "Yes, now, Sir Herbert, while you waited there, do you remember a schoolgirl of 15 or so coming up on her bicycle?" "How the devil could I remember a schoolgirl on a bicycle 18 years ago?" "Only because she gave you the letter that we have been discussing." Evelyn Carados uttered a stifled cry. Sir Herbert, did you take that letter from the schoolgirl on the bicycle? I have no recollection of it, he said. Alain nodded to Fox, who went out and ushered in Miss Harris. Good evening, Miss Harris, said Alain.
Good evening, Mr. Alain. Good evening, Lady Carados. Good evening, Sir Herbert. Good evening,
concluded Miss Harris with a collected glance at the Assistant Commissioner. Miss Harris, said Alain, do you remember staying with your uncle, Mr. Walter Harris, when you were 15?
Yes, Mr. Alain, certainly,
said Miss Harris. Carados uttered some sort of oath. At that time, said Alain, there was a fatal motor accident.
To Captain O'Brien, yes, Mr. Alain.
Good Lord, ejaculated Alain involuntarily. Do you mean to say that you have realized that—
I knew Captain O'Brien was Lady Carados's first husband, naturally.
But, said Alain, did you never think of telling Lady Carados that there was this link between you?
Oh, no, said Miss Harris. It would not have been at all my place to bring it up. When I was given the list of vacant posts at the Friendly Cousins Registry Office, I thought this seemed the most suitable, and I said to my friend Miss Smith, what an extraordinary coincidence. Because when I learned of Lady Carados's former name, I realized it must be the same, and I said to Smithy, I think that must be an omen. So I applied for the post.
I see, said Alain. And do you remember Sir Herbert, too?
Oh, yes. Sir Herbert was the gentleman in the car. You see, I had the pleasure of returning a letter that had been left behind at the vicarage.
That is an absolute lie, said Carados loudly.
Pardon me, said Miss Harris, but I am speaking the truth.
Thank you, Miss Harris, said Alain quickly. Would you mind waiting outside for a moment, Fox? Fox shepherded her out. By God, began Carados, if you take the word of a— Wait a moment, said Alain. Our case, Sir Herbert, is that you did in fact take this letter, and never gave it to the lady who afterwards married you. Our case is that you kept it for 18 years in the drawer of a writing desk in your study. Lady Carados spoke directly to her husband.
All these years you have watched me, and known how much I suffered. You hid the letter. You knew I was being blackmailed. You've always been jealous of Paddy. You—